He blonde-haired warrior on your screen never existed. Ancient DNA just proved it wrong. If that shakes something loose in you, stay close, because by the end of this video, you might never picture a Viking the same way again. For hundreds of years, we thought we knew the Vikings. Tall, fierce, blonde hair, blue eyes, horned helmets, sailing out of Scandinavia to burn, raid, and conquer. That image is burned into movies, video games, cartoons, even history books. It feels solid. It feels true. It feels like something we don't need to question. But what if almost none of it is actually correct? What if the real Vikings were something far stranger, far more complicated, and far more human than the myth we grew up with? Scientists went looking for the truth. Not in old stories, not in movies, but inside bones, inside teeth, inside blood. They pulled ancient DNA from Viking-age skeletons buried across Europe, and what they found didn't just add small details. It broke the whole picture apart. This is the story of how a 1,000-year-old identity crumbled under a microscope, and how the people we call Vikings turn out to be something the world never expected. Let's start with the version most of us grew up believing. Picture it. Cold northern coastlines, wooden longships cutting through gray water, warriors with wild hair and painted shields, screaming as they leap onto foreign shores. They raid churches, they take gold, they vanish back into the fog before anyone can stop them. This is the Viking the movies gave us. A pure Scandinavian warrior. Nordic blood, Nordic skin, Nordic eyes. One people, one bloodline, one terrifying force from the north. For centuries, this is the story that stuck. Kings, poets, filmmakers, all repeating the same image. The Viking as the ultimate symbol of Scandinavian strength. Almost like a national bloodline frozen in time. It's a powerful image. It's also, according to new evidence, mostly a fantasy. Because when scientists finally got the chance to read the actual genetic code of real Viking-age skeletons, something didn't add up. They expected to find one clear genetic group, a tight, consistent Scandinavian bloodline stretching across Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Instead, they found chaos. Beautiful, complicated, human chaos. If you're the kind of person who feels a chill when an old belief starts to crack, don't scroll past this one. Stay with me, because the cracks are only getting bigger. Here's where the story gets interesting. One of the largest ancient DNA studies on Vikings analyzed the remains of hundreds of individuals from Viking-age burial sites. These weren't just Scandinavian graves. They came from Britain, Ireland, Russia, Greenland, and other regions the Vikings were known to travel through. Researchers expected to trace one bloodline moving outward from Scandinavia, like ripples from a single stone dropped in water. What they found instead were many bloodlines, mixing, blending, and changing over generations. Some skeletons buried as Vikings, wearing Viking weapons, following Viking burial customs, carried little to no Scandinavian ancestry at all. Let that sink in for a second. People who lived, fought, and were buried as Vikings weren't always genetically Scandinavian. That single discovery cracked the old definition wide open, because it means being a Viking wasn't strictly about blood. In many cases, it was about identity, culture, and lifestyle, not ancestry. Some researchers believe local populations in places like Scotland and Ireland adopted Viking customs so deeply that they were buried exactly like Scandinavian warriors, even though their DNA told a completely different origin story. Imagine that. A warrior lying in a Viking grave, holding a Viking sword, dressed the Viking way, but whose ancestors never set foot near a fjord. This wasn't a fringe result either. It showed up again and again across the burial sites. The evidence suggests the Viking world was less about one bloodline conquering others, and more about a moving, mixing culture that pulled people in from many directions. That idea alone breaks the textbook image most of us learned. But it's not even the strangest part of the story, because ancient DNA also revealed something even more shocking about where these so-called Nordic warriors were actually coming from. Before we go further, ask yourself something. If your own ancestry turned out to be nothing like what you always believed, would you want to know the truth, or would you rather keep the comfortable story? Type your honest answer in the comments. I want to know how many of you would choose truth over comfort. Now let's go deeper. When researchers zoomed into individual regions, they found something unexpected. Even within Scandinavia, genetic diversity was much higher than anyone predicted. Denmark showed different genetic patterns compared to Norway. Norway showed different patterns compared to Sweden. And within each of those countries, there were pockets of ancestry linked to Southern Europe, and even ancestry connected to areas near Asia. This means the population we call Vikings wasn't a single isolated group hiding away in the cold north for centuries. It was a crossroads. People, trade routes, and travelers passed through Scandinavia long before the Viking-age officially began. Some genetic threads suggest contact and mixing with populations far outside Northern Europe, stretching back generations before the famous raids started. This challenges one of the oldest myths in the Viking story, the idea of racial purity. For a long time, especially during darker periods in history, people twisted the Viking image into a symbol of a pure Nordic bloodline. That idea was used to support harmful ideologies in the 20th century, falsely claiming that Scandinavians represented some untouched superior genetic line. Ancient DNA firmly and clearly rejects that idea. The real Vikings were mixed, blended, connected to more of the world than the myth ever allowed. There's something almost poetic about that. The very people history turned into a symbol of one bloodline were, in truth, a walking example of how connected humanity has always been. But the surprises don't stop there, because DNA didn't just reveal where Vikings came from, it revealed who was actually inside those famous longships. For centuries, the image of a Viking raider was almost always male, big, muscular, sword in hand. But some burial sites tell a different story. There are known cases of Viking-age graves containing weapons, shields, and warrior equipment, buried alongside a skeleton, later confirmed through DNA testing to be biologically female. One of the most famous cases involves a well-known Viking warrior burial in Sweden. For over a century, historians assumed the skeleton buried with a sword and arrows belonged to a male warrior. Then, genetic testing revealed the skeleton was female. This discovery caused intense debate. Some historians pushed back hard. Others said the evidence lined up with Old Norse legends describing female warriors, often called shield maidens, who were previously dismissed as pure myth. Historians still debate exactly what this means. Was this one exceptional case? Or were there more women warriors quietly written out of history books over time? We don't have a fully confirmed answer yet, but the evidence suggests the Viking world may have had more room for women in roles of power and combat than the traditional story ever admitted. If that idea excites you, share this video with someone who still pictures Vikings as one single type of person. Let's break that image together. Let's talk about the raiders themselves. The image involves violent, sudden attacks on unsuspecting towns, fire, screaming, terror. That part isn't a myth. Early Viking raids, especially the famous attack on Lindisfarne in 793, were brutal and shocking to the people who experienced them. Monks were killed, treasures were stolen. It left a scar on European memory that lasted for generations. But raiding was only the opening chapter of the Viking story, not the whole book. As decades passed, the same groups became settlers, traders, explorers, and even political rulers. Viking settlers created major trade networks stretching from Scandinavia all the way to Constantinople. Viking traders exchanged furs, amber, walrus ivory, and enslaved people for silver, silk, and spices. Yes, enslaved people. This is an uncomfortable truth many popular stories leave out. Viking economies were partly built on human trafficking, capturing and selling people across trade routes. It's a dark chapter that doesn't fit neatly into the heroic warrior image, but it's part of the real history. At the same time, Vikings weren't purely destroyers. They built cities. Dublin grew under Viking influence. Trade hubs in Russia developed under groups with Scandinavian ancestry, mixing with local Slavic populations, eventually helping shape the early foundations of what would become Russian history. This is the paradox at the center of the Viking story. Raiders and builders, destroyers and settlers, violent invaders in one town, respected traders in another. Ancient DNA adds another twist. Genetic evidence shows that Viking-age settlers didn't just conquer and stay separate. In many regions, they mixed extensively with local populations within a few generations. In parts of Britain, genetic traces of Scandinavian ancestry blended into local communities so thoroughly that many people living there today unknowingly carry Viking-age DNA. Think about that for a moment. Ordinary people going about daily modern life might be walking, unknowingly, with fragments of Viking ancestry running through their blood. It is not because of some heroic saga, but because of quiet, unrecorded mixing over 1,000 years ago. History isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides quietly inside ordinary people who have no idea. If this is starting to feel bigger than a simple warrior story, that's because it is. Let's shift to one of the most emotionally powerful discoveries in this entire investigation. It isn't just about war or trade. It's about health, struggle, and the hidden pain buried inside bones. Scientists studying Viking-age skeletons haven't just extracted DNA. They've studied bone structure. What they found paints a picture very different from the invincible warrior myth. Many skeletons show signs of hard physical labor from a young age, bones bent under repeated work. Not everyone was a battle-hardened raider. Many were farmers, laborers, and craftspeople. Some remains show evidence of malnutrition during childhood. Others reveal healed fractures. Dental records show signs of poor diet alongside surprisingly advanced dental modifications. Deliberate, filed grooves cut into teeth were likely worn as a mark of identity or status. This detail reveals something powerful. Vikings cared about identity and standing out. They wanted to show they belonged to something bigger than themselves. That's a very human need. Not just to survive, but to be recognized, to matter, to leave a mark saying I existed. Some skeletons also carry signs of disease that would have caused chronic pain. No cinematic warrior limping through daily life, but that was likely the truth for many. This is where the story stops being simply historical and becomes deeply human. When you strip away the myth, you're left with real people. People who got hurt. People who struggled to feed their families. People who wanted to belong to something meaningful. They lived hard lives in a hard world, doing whatever they believed necessary to survive. Maybe that's the biggest twist. Not just where Vikings came from, but who they really were. Not superhuman legends, just humans, doing what humans have always done. Struggling, adapting, searching for meaning, trying to protect the people they loved. If any part of that hits you, drop a single word in the comments that describes how this story is making you feel right now. Now, let's talk about something that completely reshapes the map of Viking identity. Ancient DNA didn't stop revealing secrets in Europe. Researchers studied Iceland and Greenland. Norse sagas describe Vikings reaching Greenland and attempting to settle in North America. For a long time, these stories were treated as legend. Then, physical evidence emerged. Archaeological digs uncovered a Norse settlement in Newfoundland, Canada. This confirms Vikings truly did reach North America centuries before other European expeditions. This wasn't just adventure. Migration and exploration were survival strategies in a limited world. Genetic studies on Greenland's Norse settlers reveal another dramatic twist. Evidence suggests these communities eventually mixed with indigenous populations in the region. This challenges yet another piece of the myth, the idea of Vikings as separate outsiders. The deeper genetic story suggests something more complicated: contact, exchange, connection. Eventually, the Greenland Norse settlement mysteriously disappeared. Historians still debate why. Climate change may have made survival too difficult alongside isolation from trade routes. It is likely a combination of several harsh pressures pushing the settlement toward collapse. This is one of history's quiet tragedies. An entire community born from ambition slowly fading. They left behind only ruins and unanswered questions. There's something haunting about that. A people who crossed dangerous seas and built new lives, eventually swallowed by time and silence. Why did the simplified one-bloodline warrior myth become so powerful in the first place? Much of the modern Viking image was shaped centuries after the Viking-age ended. Nationalist movements in the 1800s wanted a powerful symbol representing strength and purity. The Viking, dramatized and simplified, became the perfect symbol, fearless and racially pure. This distorted image later got absorbed into pop culture, books, films, and video games. Ancient DNA is now quietly, scientifically dismantling that manufactured myth, piece by piece. Bones and blood don't lie the way legends sometimes do. It makes you wonder what else is true. Real Vikings were not one bloodline. They were many bloodlines meeting and mixing. The real Vikings were not always what we imagined by gender. Some women held roles of power. The real Vikings were not separate from the world. They blended into distant lands. The real Vikings were not superhuman warriors immune to suffering. They were farmers and parents. At their core, they were humans trying to survive in a difficult, unpredictable world. This story is about how easily history can be simplified and turned into myth for a purpose. Science, especially genetic science, gives us tools that let bones speak louder than legends. It forces us to question stories we once accepted without doubt. This story is about humility. If a civilization's identity could shift under new evidence, what else do we not understand? Maybe there are other myths waiting to be broken and other silent stories waiting to be told. The Vikings taught the world fear 1,000 years ago. Today they teach us something powerful. History is never as simple as the story we are told. Identity is about choices and connection. Even the fiercest legends were simply people trying to belong and leave something behind. If this story changed how you see history, that's exactly why these stories deserve to be remembered.